9, Senate Bill 1736. You are recognized.
Senate Bill 1736 requires any person or entity that posts signage prohibiting the possession of firearms on a property for purposes of liability to accept custodial responsibility for the safety and defense of any handgun carry permit holder harmed while on the posted property. It sets statute of limitations for such an action to be 2 years from the date of the occurrence. It mandates that any notice or signage posted forbidding handgun carry permit holders from possessing a firearm must also contain language stating that any permit holder on the posted property is under the custodial responsibility of the posting person or entity. And if I may, just a few words about custodial responsibility. From my reading, I find that there is generally no duty for a person to protect another person from third-party harm. This is true even if the first person is aware of a threat. The exception is that the first person has a special relationship with the second person. The special relationship that raises this duty requires that the first person has denied a power to the second person that would otherwise empower the second person to protect himself against a third party. This relationship is termed custodial and includes landlords, employers, and hosts who set rules for the relationship that prohibit the normal self-defense capability of the second person. I found that the rule is already well established with landlord and host situations, even though a landlord may be absent. The statutory extension of the principle to property controllers who prohibit firearms is only necessary because common law extension has been withheld by a widespread apprehension against firearms. Mr. Chairman, I have a guest who has come from out of state to give testimony regarding this bill, and if I might ask to go into recess to hear from Dr. John Lott.
Okay, then without objection, we are in recess. And Mr. Lott, if you would please come forward.
While he's coming up, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Dr. Lott is an economist and a world-recognized expert on guns and crime. He has held research or teaching positions at various academic institutions, including the University of Chicago, Yale University, the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, Stanford University, and Rice University, and was the chief economist at the United States Sentencing Commission during the 1988-89 commission meetings. He is currently a Fox News columnist, and he holds a PhD in economics from UCLA. So we're very, very proud to have Dr. Lott with us today.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And he won't remember this, but he also served as my guest at the Federalist Society at Georgetown Law Center when I was a student. So thank you for being here. And if you could, please make sure that your light is lit bright and green and state your name one more time for the record. Nope.
There we go.
Yes.
Okay. It's green and bright green. I guess I have the choice. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate Senator Kelsey inviting me here, and also Senator Gresham. It's my understanding I'm actually supposed to speak on 4 bills today, Senator Gresham, Senator Kelsey, and 2 by Senator Bell. Just yesterday in Detroit, the news was filled with finding from the FBI where an ISIS sympathizer had just been caught. Apparently, he was planning on attacking the largest church in the Detroit area. And he was quoted in a wiretap that they had. He said he was explaining why he had picked this church that he was going to attack. Fortunately, the man's father realized what he was doing, was able to tip off the FBI that he was doing it, and was stopped. But the wire says it's easy, referring to why he was going after the church, and a lot of people go there. Plus, people are not allowed to carry guns in church. Plus, it would make the news. Everybody would hear about it. And one thing that you see, and I'll talk about more later, is that time after time, when you look at these mass public shootings, you find explicit statements just like that, where these killers explain why they pick the targets, and they do so time after time because people aren't able to go and defend themselves in those areas, and they can kill more people. There's 3 general points I'm going to try to make. One is the behavior of permit holders. to specific concerns about the risks of permit holders carrying guns. In particular, I'll focus on college campuses and schools. And then also the possible benefits from people being able to carry permanent concealed handguns. The behavior of permit holders, I think there's really very little debate on this. Permit holders are incredibly law-abiding. There are over 13 million concealed carry permit holders in the United States as of last year. And even that's an underestimate because in 10 states, it's not required to have a permit to be able to carry in all or virtually all the state. So we don't even know how many people legally carry, but it's at least 13 million. There are a couple things we can say. The revocation rates for any reason in different states are at tenths or hundredths of 1 percentage point. And the revocations for firearms-related violations are at thousands or tens of thousands of 1 percentage point. In Tennessee, the last 5 years that we have full data for, from January 2010 through December 2014, it averaged about 400,000 active permit holders in any given year, and there are about 2,000 denials, suspensions, and revocations. That's about 0.5 of 1 percentage point. Tennessee is the only state that I've seen which lumps together denials, suspensions, and revocations. Other states break them out. If Tennessee is equivalent to other states, denials are about 2.5 times on average greater than revocations, and suspensions are a little bit smaller. But it would mean that revocations are likely to be something over about 0.1 of 1 percentage point in Tennessee. You can look at other states for revocations for firearm-related violations. Florida, for example, from October 1st, 1987 to May 31st, 2012, had issued permits to 2.1 million people. 168 of those were revoked for any type of firearms-related violation. The primary one there was people accidentally carrying a gun into a gun-free zone, and the number 2 reason was people forgetting to have their permit with them when they were carrying. You can also look, just to get an idea of how incredibly law-abiding permit holders are, is to compare them to police officers. There's a study done in Police Quarterly that got data for 2005 to 2007 for police officers. And what you find is that permit holders, well, first of all, police officers are convicted at very low rates compared to the rest of the population, about 1/31st the rate of the rest of the population for firearms-related violations. But permit holders are convicted at less than 1/6 the rate that police officers are convicted of for firearms-related violations. I would argue it's hard to think of any other group in the population that's anywhere near as law-abiding as permit holders are. With regard to universities or schools, we have extensive experience around the country. There are 12 states that currently have laws on the books that mandate that permit holders be allowed to carry on public college campuses. 2 of those states, Kansas and Texas, have the laws on the book, but they're not yet effective. Texas's law goes into effect this July. There's an additional 21 states that leave it up to the universities in the states to make those decisions. In places like Michigan, for example, you have Michigan State University. There are other large universities around the country, though most schools in those states do not allow concealed carry on their campus when they're given a choice. But even before this, if you go back to early 2000s and before, or early 1990s and before, prior to the Federal Safe School Zone Act, very few schools had it in either student or faculty handbooks banning the possession of permanent concealed handguns on campus. So the states at that time that had concealed carry laws, virtually all the schools there allowed campus carry effectively. And whether you look at the schools that have them now or the schools that have had them in the past, it's very difficult to find any single problem that occurred. So for example, I've not been able to, or do I know anybody else, who's been able to identify one single crime that's committed by a permit holder over any of those states or schools that allow it during all those years. one concern that frequently comes up is that college students drink, there'll be irresponsible behavior. And I guess the point to make here is that it's one thing to talk about college students generally. It's another thing to go and talk about those who are willing to go through the process to go and get a concealed carry permit. If you look at universities, there's been a total of 4 accidental discharges that I've been able to identify. 1 in Colorado, 1 in Idaho, 1 in Mississippi, 1 in Utah. None of those life-threatening. If you look at K through 12, and there are about 24 states that to varying degrees allow concealed carry on K through 12 campuses, there's only 1 accidental discharge that I've been able to find. If you look at revocation rates by age of permit holders, I've been able to get data for 3 states, Michigan, Nevada, and Texas. And in each of those cases, permit holders generally are not only extremely law-abiding, but in 2 of those states, permit holders who are 21 or 22 years of age actually have somewhat lower revocation rates than the general permit holders are there. And in Nevada, it was essentially the same. Now, so what about the risks of permit holders? The 2 things, if you look at testimony for other states that come up very commonly, one, or if you have a mass public shooting and a permit holder pulls out their gun to stop that, they're worried that bystanders may be accidentally shot. The second concern that comes up is that when the police arrive on the scene, they may accidentally shoot the permit holder. I can identify over the last 5 years several dozen cases where either police, sheriff, or prosecutors have said that multiple lives were saved by the presence of a concealed carry permit holder. And yet, in not one of those cases was a bystander shot by a permit holder, or did the police accidentally shoot the person who was legally carrying. Now, with regard to the benefits, if you look at these mass public shootings, it's hard to look at this data and not come away with seeing how consciously these killers pick areas where victims can't defend themselves. There's so many times where these killers want to commit suicide, but they want to do so in a way that will get the media attention. And they know the more people that they can kill, the more media attention that they can get. So they try to pick venues where they can go and kill lots of people successfully before somebody can stop them. Since at least 1950, with just 2 exceptions, all the mass public shootings in the United States have taken place where general citizens are banned from being able to carry concealed handguns. In Europe, every single mass public shooting has occurred where people aren't allowed to defend themselves, these so-called gun-free zones. Just as an aside, most people may not realize this, but the rate of mass public shootings in Europe is actually fairly similar to the rate in the United States. There's no statistically significant difference there, either in terms of the rate or the fatalities. I'll just give you one fact that you may not realize. If you look at just last year in France, France had more casualties from mass public shootings last year, 532, than the United States has had during the entire Obama administration, 394. And there were 4 attacks in France last year, and there were 4 attacks in the United States. But I could go into that in a lot of depth. If these attacks were random, if these killers weren't taking this type of thing into account, in Tennessee here, you can carry your permitted concealed handgun in virtually any place. There's going to be some shops, some stores that may post, but relatively few do. And there are relatively few places that you are banned from being able to carry. The same is true for other concealed carry states. You would think if this was random, then 95% or so of these mass public shootings would be taking place in areas where permitted concealed handguns were banned. And yet they virtually all take place in those few areas where permitted concealed handguns aren't allowed. There's a strategic issue here, and that is police have an extremely difficult job in stopping these mass public shootings, and they should be thanked for the work that they do. But to put somebody in uniform in front of a building or some other place that they have to go and guard makes them a target. The killers have huge strategic advantages. If they arrive on the scene and they see a uniformed police officer there, they can either kill the police officer first, wait for the police officer to leave the scene, or pick another target themselves. The advantage of concealed carry is that you take away that strategic advantage from the attacker. Because even when the police officer leaves, the killer doesn't know whether it's somebody in front of him or behind or to the side who might be able to go and stop them. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but you look at these explicit statements from these killers. I mentioned one just from yesterday that was released. But look at the attacks last year. The Charleston killer. His original target was supposed to be Charleston College. But he had looked into it and he realized that they had beefed up armed security there at the college, and he was worried that he would be stopped there before he was able to go and kill other people there. Last summer, the diary was finally released for James Holmes, the Batman movie theater shooter. His original target was going to be Denver International Airport, but when he looked into the security there, he realized it was very likely he would be stopped before he could go and kill people. There were 7 movie theaters within a 20-minute drive of his apartment. Only one of those movie theaters banned permitted concealed handguns. He didn't go to the movie theaters that were closest to his apartment. He didn't go to the movie theater that advertised itself prominently as having the largest auditoriums in the state of Colorado. He went to the sole movie theater that banned permitted concealed handguns and made it so the victims couldn't defend themselves. I can go through cases in the previous year. You have places like the Santa Barbara shooter. You have cases in Canada, for example, the mass public shooting that year that I can go through where the person even put up comics on his Facebook page making fun of gun-free zones. Now, you can look at surveys of police officers. Police One, which is the largest private organization of police officers in the country, they have 450,000 members. 380,000 are active full-time law enforcement. Their survey of members asking them whether getting rid of gun-free zones would stop or reduce the tragedies at places like Newtown and Aurora. Over 80% of the 15,000 police officers that they surveyed said that they would reduce fatalities to have that.
Mr. Lott, would you please be sure to conclude your remarks with this last point? Yes.
Okay. Well, how long do I have? About a minute? 2 minutes?
I think we're out of time, honestly.
All right. Okay. I wasn't told exactly how long I was going to have. So.
And I apologize for that. That was miscommunication.
Sure. No, I apologize. Well, I was going to talk about research that Bill Landis and I had done at the University of Chicago, where we looked at all the mass public shootings in the United States from 77 through 99. I was going to talk about Ron Noble, the Secretary General of Interpol, which is kind of Europe's version of the FBI. If I could just say this, and then I want to talk a minute about Senator Gresham's bill. He said there's 2 options to try to stop these attacks. You can really try to create a gun-free zone, or you can let people defend themselves. When he first took over as Interpol Secretary General in 2000, he thought the obvious approach was to create a gun-free zone. But after 15 years in that job, he's become convinced that there's absolutely no way you can guarantee that terrorists or other killers aren't going to find a way to bring weapons into these gun-free zones. That the only people that you end up disarming are the law-abiding victims that are there, making them easier targets for the killers. And I could go on with his comments on that. But just a really brief statement about Senator Gresham's bill. 1736. There's a general duty clause in the Occupational Safety and Health Administration Act of 1970. And the problem is, basically, it's a mandate to require employees to provide a workplace that is, quote, free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. The problem has been the way that that's been interpreted. Not very clearly and not very consistently. But if you're going to go and ask most lawyers who are practicing in the field, they would go and tell you that they would urge their clients not to allow guns, even permanent concealed handguns, in the workplace there. I would go and argue that these gun-free zones are providing a hazard that would be there. But the problem is that unless that's clarified in a way that would be satisfactory for OSHA, I view Senator Gresham's bill as essentially providing a counterbalance to the OSHA rules that are there, and maybe making it more able for the employer to take into account the true costs and benefits that they're going to be facing there. Personally, I would leave it up to the employer to make the decision themselves that we're there and get rid of any pressure from OSHA with regard to that. Anyway, I appreciate your time. I guess the last thing I would just say is, if you were threatened, if somebody was stalking you, would you put a sign in front of your home that said this home is a gun-free zone? My guess is nobody here would do this. In all the debates I've had on gun control, I've never run into a gun control advocate that would put up a sign like that in front of their home. And the simple reason for that is they know that rather than dissuading the criminal from attacking, it would actually make it more likely that they would go there because they know that they'd have less to worry about in terms of somebody being able to stop them. I apologize for going long there, but I appreciate your patience with me.
Thank you, Mr. Lott. Chairman Gresham.
Mr. Chairman, I rest my case. Mr. Chairman, during the last few days, I have had some discussions with some of my colleagues. They've recommended a few changes in the language, and I'd like to roll it a week so that I can make those changes and bring that back next week, if I may, sir.
That's number 18 on our calendar, and you're recognized on Senate Bill 1736.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, when I came before you last was several weeks ago, and we had heard comprehensive and compelling testimony from Dr. John Lott from the Crime Research Center on the dynamic between posting against guns and mass shootings. After that presentation, I had to roll the bill because I wanted to clean up some language in the bill. But it's a good thing I did, because in the ensuing weeks, I had several of my colleagues plus some other people come and talk to me about the bill and how some people were uncomfortable with it. And I think the most direct criticism of it was, Dolores, it sounds like what you're doing is poking people in the eye with a sharp stick. And so what perhaps we could do is do a gentler way of approaching this, your bill. So the result of those discussions is in the amendment that I bring you today, which is the barcode is 013338. And what essentially that does, it creates immunity from civil liability for a person, business, or other entity that owns, controls, or manages property and has the authority to prohibit weapons on such property by posting signage pursuant to the code today. And especially with respect to any claim based on the person's businesses or other entity's failure to adopt a policy prohibiting weapons on the property. Further, it specifies that the immunity granted under this legislation does not apply to a person, business, or other entity whose conduct or failure to act is the result of gross negligence or willful or wanton misconduct. So what essentially we've done is, if you remember, the first approach to the bill was to authorize lawsuits, if you will, based on the principle of custodial responsibility. This takes kind of the opposite view of the the goal of the bill, and that was to essentially take down the sign. And that was, as we had heard before from Dr. Lott, as he explained those dynamics between having a sign up and the resulting mass shootings that occurred. So I bring you this amendment today, sir.
Is there a motion again on the bill? So it's moved by Senator Bowling. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Kyle. And then is there a motion on the amendment? It's moved by Senator Bowling. Is there a second? Seconded by the chair. On the amendment, discussion on the amendment. Yes, Senator Overby, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the sponsor, could you give us an example of how this bill, if the amendment is adopted, how it works. Can you give an example of where the immunity would attach?
Dr. Lott told us that if you post the sign that says "No guns allowed," that was like drawing a bee to a flower. So what you were essentially doing was saying, active shooters, welcome here. So if you so the original approach was, if you have the sign up, then you're liable for to be sued. This one says, take the sign down, and you will have civil immunity in case anything happens.
So you would have immunity from something that happened by someone bringing a gun on the premises.
Correct. And did damage.
And did damage.
Right.
And the amendment doesn't protect willful or wanton conduct. Can you give me a scenario of what would be willful and wanton in regard to not posting?
I think one of the iterations that we had on the bill was kind of a description of that phrase, and it might have looked like this. Someone who knew that something was about to happen because they observed suspicious characters and did nothing about it, or was able to identify someone and did nothing about it. So essentially, that was how we described it.
Senator Bowling.
So you have created the inverse corollary with a carrot instead of a stick.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the Madam Chair for the amendment. I think that this is a great improvement of the bill. I'm unlikely to be supportive, and I just wanted to tell you why. And one of the reasons is as I understand the bill in its currently amended form, is it treats property owners a little bit differently. And I'm not sure we should mess with property ownership because I believe that property ownership is really central to our system of government and capitalism, private property ownership. And this bill would create a dangerous precedent in how we treat private property owners, because it says that one set of private property owners is entitled to a protection and another set of private property owners is not entitled to the same protection. And so I'm just uncomfortable as I sit, and maybe by the time it gets to the floor I'll feel differently, but I'm uncomfortable as I sit with us messing with private property owners and dividing them up and giving some of them protections that we don't give others. So, but I appreciate the change, and I do think it's an improvement. Thank you.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Item 17, Senate Bill 1736 by Senator Gresham on third and final consideration.
Senator Gresham, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move passage of Senate Bill 1736 on third and final consideration.
Senator Gresham moves passage of Senate Bill 1736 on third and final consideration. That's seconded. Amendments, Mr. Clerk.
Amendment number 1, Senate Judiciary Committee amendment.
Chairman Kelsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment number 1 makes the bill, and it provides civil liability immunity for premises that do not post pursuant to 3917-1359 from claims based on not posting. It does not apply to gross negligence or to willful or wanton misconduct. I move adoption.
Mr. Kelsey moves adoption of amendment number 1. It's a committee amendment. We'll do a voice vote. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. We adopt. We're back on the bill as amended. Senator Gresham, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The chairman of Judiciary explained the bill, explained the amendment, which makes the bill, and I'll renew my motion.
We're on the bill. Objection to question. Senator Harris, you're recognized. Senator Harris, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the sponsor for this bill, and I think this bill has improved a great deal from its original form. I think the amendment is significant, and I think it's important, but I still have some problems with this bill, and part of the reason why I have some problems with this bill is what was expressed by Senator Bell earlier, or started to be expressed by Senator Bell earlier, and that is in this body, I think it's important to be a fierce defender of private property. And this bill, as I understand it right now, treats private property ownership differently. And so it extends an immunity protection for private property owners who who don't post. It extends an immunity protection for private property owners who permit guns on the premises, and says that private property owners who do not agree that there should be guns on the premises do not get the benefit of the immunity. And I think that, again, that is an important and significant difference among private property owners, and I think they should be treated the same. Let's either give all private property owners this special and important immunity, or let's not give any private property owners this special and important immunity. But let's not get into the affairs of private property owners and how they decide in their own discretion how to treat and whether or not to allow guns on their own premises. What they do in their house or in the property they own should be their decision. And I don't think it is a good idea, me personally, and I think reasonable people can disagree, as they do. I don't think it's a good idea personally for us to get involved in that private property owner's decision. And so I've got mixed feelings about the bill, as I've expressed, but I do think it's been greatly approved with the amendment. I thank the sponsor and I thank the speaker. Thank you.
Further discussion on the bill? Senator Yarborough, you're recognized.
Will the sponsor yield for a question?
Yields.
Would this also apply to churches that adopt a policy about weapons on the premises of their during church services?
Senator Gresham?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, it would.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I share Leader Harris's concerns about anytime we start offering such stark incentives, and this is a very stark incentive to say that you get absolute immunity from suit, or almost absolute immunity from injuries, if you adopt the policy that we want you to adopt, and if you don't, well, you very well could face serious liability. But we're compelling private businesses to change the way they make their decisions about what's going on internally. But we're also doing the same thing to religious institutions. And there are lots of churches, and we've talked a lot about religious freedom this year. There are a lot of churches out there who have very serious and heartfelt concerns. I know that churches across the state have wrestled with this issue, struggled with it, decided sort of how to best be both a welcoming community and one that adheres to their values. And I think that when we start having a law like this, where this legislature tells a religious institution, a civic institution, a business that we want you to do it our way, and we're going to make sure that there's a lot of money in it for you if you do, and there's not if you don't, then I think we got a real big problem. Now, whether or not what's the right decision on the merits of whether they should allow permit holders or not, I think that's a perfectly open to debate. But we are basically taking away what is a private property choice. And if we're not defending private property rights, I'm not exactly sure what it is that we're doing here. And if we're not defending religious rights to control your own, what's going on in your own house of worship, I'm not exactly sure what we're doing here.
Gresham?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think my colleague has gone far afield on what the bill does and what it encourages. During the committee hearing, we received comprehensive and compelling testimony from Dr. John Lott from the National Crime Research Center, and based on data that had been taken since the 50s. And the bottom line was there was a direct relationship between posting "No Guns Allowed" and the number of mass shootings at those given places. So the posting of no guns allowed was almost the same thing as saying active shooters welcome here. So what the bill does, it just encourages people not to post. Not to post. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We're on Senator Hensley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
She yields.
Does this bill change in any way the situation that private property owners have now if they post? This bill doesn't change anything. It doesn't influence their private property rights, or doesn't make them any more likely to be sued if we pass this bill rather than what the present situation is.
Mr. Gresham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, it doesn't change anything.
We're on the bill. Further discussion? Objection, question? Seeing none, we're on the board. Those in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. So every member voted. Mr. Clerk, take a vote.
Ayes 26, 4 nays.
Senate Bill 1746, having received Constitutional majority, hereby declare it passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider goes to table. Senator Norris.